Welcome to another exciting episode of Ken's Corner. Ken, how are you doing, my brother?
I'm doing good. You know, I forgot to tell you in the pre-show about the shirt, and I forgot to mention my shirt last week. So we got to do the shirt thing I got 100, 200 shirts, and so that guy started a shirt war. So
Gotcha. So you were left unsupervised. What happened when you were left unsupervised?
Yeah, I don't know. I lost control. I don't know what happened. I took my notes. That's what happens when I was unsupervised.
Chaos ensued. Well, if you did not know this, Ken this week is here to do an Atsuen Empi Uchi, which is a rolling elbow strike straight to the face of current events and news.
Hiya.
Oh, there it is. There it is.
Perfect. I can do that, man. That's an elbow strike.
That is an elbow strike, straight to the face.
I knew that one. I can't believe I knew that one. Wow.
Ken, we have so much news to get to.
It's just too much. It's just too much.
Always is. Let's start with the war update in Ukraine.
Yeah. Well, not too many Americans are getting the truth. So I just wrote some notes down just to give them a little bit of update on what's going on. And Ukraine, it's failed at now fourth or fifth. I'm losing track. The spring or summer offensive. I don't know, because it was supposed to be spring. Now it's summer, and I don't even know anymore. But I was surprised the other day that the Telegraph over in Great Britain published an article that for once was quite truthful. It pointed out that the West is staring at what they termed catastrophic defeat in Ukraine. I couldn't believe it. There's a couple other news items that were just talking, bad about Ukraine in the regular media. I couldn't believe it. But they went on to explain that the Ukrainians have lost within their first months now more than 26,000 dead, thousands of wounded, and over 1,100 pieces of different equipment. But it's like tanks, armored fighting vehicles, trucks, you name it. But they also lost because of deep strikes by Russians, their large ammunition storage depots and food, you name it. So the Russians have annihilated many of the grain storage areas in and around Odessa. And, the Russians finally decided to shut the port down of Odessa and certain areas because Ukrainians were bringing ships in that were supposedly empty to pick up grain. But they were not empty. They were bringing in arms and ammunition. Kind of reminds me of the Lusitania, right? So we weren't taking any arms to in World War I, and they actually warned the passengers of Lusitania not to get on board because they knew that we're arming the Europe. So the Russians said enough is enough. No more nonsense. And this will drive up the price of grain, obviously, largely for Europe, but not exclusively. The Ukrainians are going to have to export entirely over land into Poland and in the Baltics. The point is the war has taken a real nasty turn. And I really think that Ukrainians are facing disintegration. Their army is in terrible condition. There was an excerpt from a report that was released in Kiev that talks about the mass desertion that's happening in the battlefield. So units are giving up basically because they can't evacuate their wounded, and that's important. When a commander can't evacuate his wounded, he has a choice. He can sit there and watch all of them die, or he, because he can't really move his force, or he can surrender, basically saying, I'm not going to stand around and watch all these, people die. So many have surrendered to the Russians, and the Russians have been smart. They always treat surrendering troops very, very well. They don't abuse them. They feed them, clothe them, send them to decent facilities where they can be kept until a prisoner exchange or something occurs. So basically, the Ukrainians are, for the most part, not afraid to surrender to the Russians. The whole thing on the Ukrainian side is disintegrating. And I think that's one of the reasons you saw that, I talked about it last week, was the Zelensky being treated like a redheaded stepchild at the Vilnius summit, right? So it was crazy how he was, politically shunned by the same people who have stuffed his pockets for the years now, for the last year. And it's just lunacy, man. Zelensky was in costume as usual. He's presented himself as the battlefield commander, which of course is a joke. But the larger problem is this, and most Americans don't seem to understand that, hundreds of thousands of people have been killed, overwhelmingly Ukrainian soldiers and civilians. We think that 300,000 to 350,000 Ukrainian soldiers are dead. And you say that, and the Western media says, oh, that's not true. And the Russians have lost that many. And that's absurd. That's absurd. The Russians have taken very light casualties compared to that. And that's just the truth. There's a battle of attrition and on who's, going to lose the most first. And that's already happened. Ukraine is being attributed, man. So the tragedy here is it needs to end because it's not going to get any better. The problem has always been the same. I mean, how do you build an armed force on the fly? Because the Ukrainian army that existed at the onset was about 400,000, including reserves, and most of the men they're dead or wounded now. So then you have to fall back on new armies, and new armies can't rise quickly, right? You can't just build a new army. They need institutions. They have, they have to have leadership. They have to have training, organization. They have to have systematic equipment programs. You don't build an army out of a hodgepodge of equipment from 15 different countries. It's nonsense. So this whole project is collapsing, and we're going to see a point of desperation. But what we're doing in the meantime is lying, trying to convince people in the site something is real that isn't. That is the Ukrainian state is real. No, it's dying. It's dying. The Ukrainian nation is at risk of going out of existence. I said this a couple shows ago. No one has courage in Washington or London to stand up and tell the truth, and it's got to end. If for no other reason, for the grounds of humanitarian concern. All right. So, and then of course you have the Europeans, you have the Poland, Slovakia, and Hungary, Germany, and many other countries saying we got to end this, and the Ukrainians got to go home. But what's funny is because virtually every Ukrainian that comes out, says I'm never going back. Right. Why would they go back to a hopelessly corrupt gangster state where they can be further exploited? But here's the deal. And then we don't even talk about the 60,000 children that have disappeared, coming out of Ukraine. And if you've seen the movie Sound of Freedom, we talked about it last week, but it doesn't take a genius to figure out what happened to them. But anyway, I think the Russians now know that this is called the Ukraine is falling apart. The Zelensky government is a facade. The corruption, the incompetence, the squandering of resources, and worst of all, the squandering of human life in defense of what is really a sick, perverse regime in Kiev. And the Russians are saying, let's get out of this, right? So they're stepping it up. They got an offensive underway. And, the Russian offensive is actually, they're slow and methodical, and they're not taking on, they don't want to take on casualties. But there's certain areas that there's strong points for Ukrainian soldiers, but they're crushing it. They're going just slow and steady. And they're happy when the Ukrainians surrender because they don't have to, the Ukrainians, because they're Slavic Orthodox Christians, much like themselves, right? So lastly, I just look at the stupidity of the entire thing. The Russians have strategic vital interest in Ukraine, just like we have this, vital strategic interest in Mexico, right? So for us to insist that Russia go along with the transformation of Ukraine into a giant weapon aimed at Russia by the U.S. is insane. We would not tolerate that if that were the case in Mexico. So what we're looking for, unfortunately, is millions of lives lost, trillions of dollars wasted, and at the end of the day, it will be China that rebuilds the whole region. So, but that's my update, man. That's just. I wrote 6-7 pages of update just to get people updated on what's really going on, because we have no clue. We have no clue. I don't have a clue.
To just kind of highlight a couple things that you brought up that, in addition, I wanted to bring up. Before the war, Ukraine had a surplus of women. In fact, it was one of the top destinations for Western men to go search for brides in the Ukraine.
Yeah.
So they already had a female surplus. Now with a generation of men, that were enlisted in the Ukrainian military, and now who are being conscripted, there's going to be a lost generation of Ukrainian men. So moving forward, Ukraine as an ethnic, or even like an ethnic identity.
Yeah.
It's in jeopardy because there's a bunch of women and all the men are being killed off systematically by Zelensky.
Wow. And how much have moved out? It's gone from, it was like 49 million. Now it's down to 28 million, 20, or maybe down lower. I don't know. It's down. I forget what 20 million. I forget what the number was, but I know that people have left. They've gone up north, south, east. They've gone everywhere. Out of there.
But Zelensky is part of a greater narrative in the world. It's kind of indicative of, like, we tolerate the poor performance of Biden, and people will completely blindly support him without seeing the damage he's doing and saying, oh, well, it was much worse than this other guy that was in there. Based on party lines, Zelensky has led the country to absolute desolation.
Desolation, yes. And that's what,
And yet people will still, he's a freedom fighter. He's a folk hero, a rebel, a renegade. No.
Yeah.
The guy is seeing to the death of his nation. And by the way, making a tidy fortune doing it.
Yeah, he's going to come out to Miami and retire, and he's already a billionaire. He's got all that money stored, and that's nuts. Yep.
Speaking of a tidy sum of money, let's talk about Fed now.
All right, I'm going to go on another rant because I'm going to just give a little history, and then say how it's relevant to end times. But I'll just give a little history. But the Fed Now was launched on this Thursday, the 20th of July. But it's the Fed Reserve launches its new payment system that lets you send money in seconds. All right. So the long-awaited instant payment, which allows consumers and business to send and receive money in seconds, just a step closer to the financial system of the end times. It's just, I'll relate it in a second. It will serve as a basic infrastructure for instant payments by linking banks. Transactions occur between bank accounts and enabling funds to be transferred from a sender's bank account to a receiver's bank account immediately. The money can move from consumer to consumer, consumer to business, or business to business. The Federal Reserve built the Fed Now service to help make everyday payments over the coming years faster and more convenient, said Fed Chairman Jerome Powell. And he went on to say, over time, as more banks choose to use this new tool, the benefits to individuals and businesses will include enabling a person to immediately receive a paycheck or a company to instantly access funds when an invoice is paid. So Fed Now is different from apps like Venmo, which require holding balances in app rather than sending and receiving money directly to or from the bank account. And the apps like Venmo, they're not instantaneous, right? So we think they are, but they're not. I know they're not, because I've been trying to get Venmo'd money, and it's like, oh, I can't post that, I got to pay off that, blah blah blah. It takes a couple of days, or it takes a day. Consumers might have the impression that sending money through Venmo is instant, but Venmo doesn't do real-time settlement. That's a quote. There's no money in hand in your wallet. There's a lot of gymnastics behind the scenes needed to settle the payment, and thus it's not a true real-time payment. This service launches with 35 banks, different banks, different size banks, including JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, and that includes credit unions too. The Fed Reserve is focused on increasing the number of institutions that use Fed Now for sending and receiving payments. The U.S. isn't mandating the financial institution service, but that's yet, right? But with the Fed Now process, some banks will need to upgrade older payment infrastructures, accounting procedures, and other bank office hours to accommodate the expanding 24/7. It's going to be 24/7 operating hours. The Fed believes when Fed Now is fully available and widely used, individuals individuals will be able to instantly receive their paychecks and use them the same day. Same businesses can more efficiently manage cash flows with processes daily. So the Fed maintains that making funds immediately available will help Americans live paycheck to paycheck. And I which will be majority of Americans, it'll be the world soon, or small businesses with cash flow constraints by avoiding late payment fees and freeing up growth, working capital of finance growth. So over the coming years, the Fed says customers of banks and credit unions that sign up for the service should be able to use the bank's app or website to send instant payments. So, but Fed Governor, here's where the marriage we can see. Fed Governor Michelle Bowman has said that Fed now could offer the same benefits as central bank digital currency. All right, so there's your marriage right there. This is the precursor to the U.S. central bank digital currency. So once the digital dollar is in place, the government will be able to see every transaction that you make, and will have a file and everything it uses it. But the problems that I think about the Canadian truckers, right, that have their bank accounts frozen and even their credit cards turned off. And we got to be skeptical and discerning of any form of currency control by the government, But this sounds similar to. So India has a unified payment infrastructure that's been in place for 7 years, and China has a similar thing. In India, there's something like 8 billion transactions per month on the UPI, the unified payment structure. So you get the world on board, and then the Antichrist comes in and takes all this intel, and it's just slowly rising up. But the government will eventually have unencumbered access to every financial transaction that is made. But this reminds me of, it's just a precursor to what eventually we see in Revelation 13. 16 and 17. I'm going to read that. So Revelation 13, 16 and 17. And he causes all the small and great and the rich and poor and the free men and the slaves to be given a mark on their right hand or their forehead. And he provides that no one will be able to buy or sell except the one who has the mark, either the name of the beast or the number of his name. And that's what's coming. We can see it. We can see it just slowly going, and that's what's coming. So sorry to be so boring with all the intel, but I think, people can just, kind of see what's happening. And one of my clients, I got to give a shout out to my client. She pointed out this to me, but it's coming, and it's coming fast.
So Ken, I just wanted to give you a real quick number. So they say that Fed now will eliminate overdrafts or help ease overdraft late payments for most people. The banks in 1 year make about $15 billion in overdraft fees in profit. Wow. And it comes from just 9% of their customers.
Wow.
15 billion.
I did not know that. Wow.
So let's take that with a grain of salt. Why would the banks be on board to get rid of the thing that gives them their best cash cow, unless there was something else there?
Yeah. There has to be. There's got to be. There's got to be, and it's inevitable. Yeah. Wow.
15 billion a year.
Wow.
This goes to show you there's something going on with these exchanges.
Yes. And the CBDC thing coming, and you guys talked about that a little bit. I didn't want to overdo it, so I want to talk about different stuff on my podcast than you guys do on Jacob. So
one quick thing that I wanted to mention that I didn't get a chance to speak about on Catching Up with Jacob was the BRICS exchange for gold. I recently had an opportunity to listen to the CEO of Lear Financial about the reasons why BRICS is coming and what that means in the long term. So right now, the U.S. holds about 8,000 tons of gold. Between Russia and China, they hold about 4,000 tons. And when you add South Africa and India, it gets them up to about 5,000 to 6,000 tons of gold. What BRICS will force the U.S. to do, if it's replaced as the petrodollar, when the U.S. needs oil, they will have to settle their buying of oil, not in dollars, but in actual gold. So you're going to see a transfer of wealth from the U.S. Those 8,000 tons of gold will slowly be dripping over into the BRICS nations. And he who controls the gold controls the financial institution markets of the world.
Yeah.
Whoever holds the most gold, that's where people want to do business as far as banking, because there's something backing their investment.
Yes.
On top of that, you can see now why you have such a push in the United States by Democrats and the left to get off of oil, because they know it's a financial landmine in the future if we continue to be married to petrol, because suddenly they're going to lose their gold.
They are. Yep. Wow. That's insight. Yep.
That's what I have to offer. But talking about this is the escalation that the BRICS is doing. It's basically showing that the U.S. is no longer going to have an economic hegemony of the world.
Yeah.
I had to think about that
word. I had to think about that too. but it's coming. It'll happen, and everything's going east. You can see it going east. So, and that's figure by 2032 is what I'm looking at with my research, with my guys that I've researched. So,
another escalation that we're seeing is NATO and their provocation to a new level. Talk to me a little bit about that, Ken.
So what has come out of the last week's NATO meeting at Vilnius is the West is escalating the war with Russia, and they're expanding the sharing, quote unquote, of nuclear weapons at the request of Poland, which it's always been rejected, right? This will mean that any nation with F-35s and F-16s will have available to them nuclear weapons. They can hold nuclear weapons, F-16s, F-35s. This is why Russia has warned that handing Ukraine F-16s will mean that they must now assume that they could carry nuclear weapons. The entire reason that NATO will not allow Ukraine to enter NATO is because as long as Ukraine is not a member, the neocons can funnel everything to them, right? The neocons are using Ukraine as a sacrificial lamb on the altar of war. So, but they hope that Ukraine will create some type of false flag to justify a nuclear war with Russia. We kind of saw that with them and the grain and stuff. But Victoria Nuland, who is a total neocon crazy, is now number 2 in the State Department. And her sister-in-law, Kimberly Kagan, founded the Institute for the Study of War, ISW, which is a source of total fake news, so much fake news. But all the ISW does is put out propaganda about Russia, that they're corrupt and weak, and that they can take down we can take them down in a few weeks. And what's funny is that the New York Slime wrote an article about the Kagan family, saying that they were the far leftists and very outspoken to the point of manipulating whatever, gain their worldview. But Zelensky is pure evil. Let's just say the truth. He has sold his own nation out to the neocons for a handful of silver, by BlackRock and JP Morgan. But Zelensky is a simple war criminal. He's an actor. He's nothing more. But he's destroying his country because he cares nothing about his people and plans to exit to a mansion in Miami. We talked about that. And when all said and done, he's just going to be ended up in Miami. He always dresses in army clothes. That's what's crazy, is we talked about this. And the psychological ploy to constantly pretend he's fighting for freedom. But he's willing to destroy his country and hope that he will be able to sell the farmland and resources to BlackRock and live in Miami as a billionaire, tax-free, of course, right? So,
wait. The farmland that's now filled with depleted uranium?
Yeah, right. But it's funny but I got a source in the Ukrainian military that it's coming out, and that general. So he was talking to this General Serhiy Krivonos, and he's openly said Zelensky is indeed has destroyed his country. And he said, this is, quote, his colossal mistake resulted in hundreds of thousands of dead Ukrainians and the destruction of a huge number of cities. That's a quote. So, yeah, and that's it. Slowly people are coming out. So, that's, and like I said earlier in my war update, the news, I got that from the Telegraph, you know, and it was like other, you know, the Guardian and some of the other, you know, foreign news organizations, you know, reported, you know, some, you know, I would call it, you know, anti-Ukraine stuff. So
I think it was Scott Ritter that said that he doesn't think Vladimir Zelensky is going to make it to his retirement.
No,
he thinks that at some point there's going to be someone in the military that turns on him, that just says enough is enough. We need to ask for peace. Yeah,
there's three possibilities that could happen. Somebody you know, turn on him, or they could turn on him. You know, do like a E2 Brutus, you know, and they kill him. Or he could you know, it's like let me think real quick. So I lost my thought. Dang it, I lost my thought.
I was thinking that they would capture him and hand him over to the Russians.
Yeah, they could. Yeah, that could be. I'm just thinking. I got my mind going. I'm thinking, but he might not make it to Miami. You know, he might not make it to his retirement. You know, but
who knows? Who knows?
Yeah, who knows at this point?
I think he'll join the basement. He'll join Biden, not Biden, but Obama in his basement in his pajamas.
Yes.
Just be talking to the next leader of
Ukraine.
Of Ukraine.
Yeah. I don't know if he. I don't think he makes it. I don't think he makes it that far.
If I was a gambling man, the odds are not there for him.
No, the odds are not in his favor.
No.
He's not Hunger Games.
Speaking of Ukraine again, and just the immense cost and the loss of treasure that we've poured into that country, let's talk a little bit about some of the investments we wanted to make here in America as opposed to overseas. And just the price of the wall as opposed to the price of war in Ukraine.
Yeah, it's amazing how all the U.S. border wall opponents strongly favor aid to Ukraine. You know, so remember when President Trump requested $5.7 billion in funding to build a wall to protect us, you know, protect the southern border. And that amount seems like pocket change now compared to tens of billions of dollars, you know, that we've given Zelensky. But as predicted, there's been a mass influx of illegals into the U.S. and all of it was completely preventable. In fact, the nation spends more on maintaining the population of illegal migrants than it would spend on building the border wall right now at this point. And if you can remember, Congress decided to stop working and throw a fit over Trump's wall at the beginning of 2019, right? So Congress refused to work for 35 days. I remember that. But then on February 15th, and I remember this too, on 2019, Trump declared a national emergency over the mass influx of migrants and invoked the powers provided by the 1976 National Emergency Act. So Congress continually voted to override this ruling following a number of vetoes by Trump. It was like back and forth, right? So no one wanted to permit the United States to protect its own border, right? So even members of the Republican Party mocked Trump's wall, and that was funny as an outlandish pipe dream. So it just so happened that the same Republicans who denied Trump's wall also strongly defended the Ukraine war, and they call his wall massive, wasteful spending. So I guess 200 plus billion to Ukraine is fine. I don't even know what we're at. We're over 200 billion. But an example of this ridiculousness of the Republicans is Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski, who said, if you're going to spend that kind of money, you're going to have to show me where you're going to get that money. So this is 5.9 billion, right? This is nothing compared to what we've given to Ukraine. Yet she traveled to Ukraine to meet with Zelensky to ensure, that he would have a secure border. But another example is Bob Corker, a Republican from Tennessee, and he said Trump's wall was not in the budget, yet Corker supported funding Ukraine against Russia, introducing the Corker legislation to increase aid to Ukraine and sanction Russia. So the list of examples it's endless. So the neocons are on both sides of the aisle, right? And they do not care about America or national security. They don't. But they did everything in their power to undermine Trump's attempt to secure the border, and now the U.S. is overrun with so many illegals, too many to track. Yeah.
Ken, how much was the wall?
5.9 billion, or 5.7 billion. Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna give you a staggering number. So 5.9 billion. 5.7 billion. The cost of the wall is 3.6% of what we've given to Ukraine.
Oh man! Wow.
3.6%.
And I didn't write in my war notes that most of what I did, most of their stuff's destroyed. Most of their stuff that we gave them is destroyed.
Yep.
So yeah, like half of it or something. Man, it's crazy.
That is a staggering number.
Yep.
You know what else is staggering? This new confidential Biden DOD memo that you talked to me about.
Oh yeah, this is going to be a good one. So his confidential Biden DOD memo reveals transgender service members can skip deployments and receive indefinite physical fitness standards and waivers. All right. So a new Department of Defense memo goes into great detail on the topic of care of service members who identify as transgender. That's quote unquote. So I got to see the document, which it's not classified, but it's remained unavailable to most Americans. And it's a 34-page memo detailing the enormous perks granted to service members who identify as transgender. And so here's some of the highlights found within the document. So you want me to go through the 1, 2, 3, 4?
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, and then we'll go back, and then you actually added up how much. But the first taxpayer-funded care for transgender service members included, this is number 1, speech voice therapy, cross-sex hormones, laser hair removal, voice feminization surgery, facial contouring, body contouring, breast chest surgery, upper surgery, genital mutilation surgery, lower surgery, and the psychological counseling. And that's number 1. Number 2, service members who identify as transgender may receive a waiver for grooming and uniform standards. Number 3, service members who identify as transgender may receive an indefinite waiver for physical fitness standards. That's crazy. This waiver often becomes a de facto permanent situation, and the transgender identifying service member just has to renew the exemption request every 6 months. And lastly, number 4, service members who identify as transgender will be considered non-deployable for up to 300 days while taking hormones for their transition period. Again, given that these hormones are often required for life, this may render the transgender identifying service member as permanently unable to deploy. Now, you did a breakdown of pricing on the care. So tell me.
All right. For voice therapy, the estimated cost will be $640 over a few months. For laser hair removal, $3,000 per person. For the cross-sex hormones, you're looking at about $240. For voice feminization surgery, you're looking at about $9,000.
Wow.
For facial contouring, $50,000.
Wow.
For body contouring, $15,000. For breast surgery, $10,000. For genital surgery, $40,000. And for counseling and miscellaneous, $2,500. For a grand total per person of $130,000 per soldier that will never be deployed. And by the way, taxpayer money. And by the way, just want to make this point. The reason why they will not deploy someone who are taking cross-sex hormones is because in the cases of women, when you give a woman testosterone, they become psychotic.
Yes. That when their testosterones are off, I've read a lot about. Yes, totally, absolutely. You give men up too much,
Correct.
You can see the old, the roid rage, when they're taking, just they're the huge bodybuilders. I was a bodybuilder back in the day, and I was around a lot of these guys. I didn't take a whole lot of stuff, but I did take stuff back in the day. I don't take anything now, but obviously for the last 30 years, but I was taking stuff, and I was taking a minimal amount. And these guys some of them were nuts. I mean, it just, and that's the guys. So imagine putting it into someone who
doesn't necessarily have the tolerance for that amount of testosterone.
No. But
well, that's an expensive bill to pay for useless soldiers.
Yeah, exactly. But the military's, I went on, and the U.S. military is facing its worst recruiting since 1973, during the Vietnam War. This is when the conscription era ended and the current, all-volunteer force was formed. As the Defense Department memo makes it clear, the U.S. military in 2023 represents more of a social welfare and social justice program than an entity purposed with defeating an aggressing army. So I'm just thinking back. So, you couldn't get a waiver for a deadly experimental injection. You couldn't get a waiver for that with no long-term studies for a virus that wasn't dangerous to young and fit people. You couldn't get a waiver for that. You had to take the jab. So this is just a judgment. It's just a judgment on our country. So we can see it in every aspect of our country. So
absolutely.
Yeah. Kind of like Rome. Rome was the same way.
Well, Rome was a little bit different because the legions, it no longer was a patriotic thing. It was completely, you did not care about who you were fighting for. You were mercenaries. To be honest, if the U.S. military became exactly like some of the mercenaries that we hire, kind of like the Russian mercenaries.
Yeah.
If our military was nothing but that, with a very small force of, let's call them regulars, then you have Rome.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And that's why the Alaric and the Visigoths, they came and conquered. They were being paid by Rome, and then they stopped their payment. And they're like, all right, we're gonna come and conquer you now.
Yeah, if you're not gonna pay us money, we might as well take what we've been defending.
That's where the term "barbarian at the gates" came from. That's it. Yeah, great history.
All right, moving on to our next topic. This one is disconcerting because these are the people that are shepherding the people of God.
Yes.
You gave me a number. Pastors are more lonely than ever.
Yeah.
Talk to me about the percentages and where they were and where they are.
So, and it's new research by Barna, and it shows that pastors are feeling lonelier and more isolated than in recent years. But more pastors report feeling more left out of their church community, even while providing support to the very same group of people. But the study revealed that last year, 65% of the pastors reported feeling lonely or isolated at times. And that's up from 42% in 2015. So that's 65% from 42%. That's quite a bit. Barna also asked pastors if they felt well supported by people close to them. And 49% said yes, dropping from 68%, so almost 20% in 2015. So 68% in 2015 said, that more people supported them. It's crazy. But Barna also found about 35% of pastors get monthly spiritual support from a network of peers or a mentor. So it's 35%. But CBN News reported also that pastors are not only facing loneliness, but are burnt out as well. And according to Lifeway Research's 2022 Greatest Needs of a Pastor study, 75% of pastors say they're extremely stressed, and 90% report they work between 55 and 75 hours per week. So we need to pray for, this. Actually, this is a quote from Joshua Smith, a pastor, and he said, we need to pray for the spirit of wisdom so we can delegate some of those tasks God has called us to, right? So basically, and I was telling you in the pre-show, sounds like Moses and his father-in-law gave him sound advice in Exodus 18. He came up and he said, you can't do this all day. There's a million people. You can't do this. So he acquired the thousands, the hundreds, the tens, and he delegated, to them. So that's good advice.
Yes, but, it's excellent advice. It does need to be a team. It can't be just on the shoulders of one man.
Yeah.
At least not unless it's the Son of God.
Isn't that crazy? Yeah. Well, isn't that crazy? Moses was doing. He was up early in the morning, and he'd go till evening. It was nuts because how many people they say 1 million. So I don't know how many were in the Exodus, but so yeah. How do you do that? I mean, he delegated literally thousands and hundreds and fifties and tens, and then so he was doing it all. That's crazy.
That is very crazy. But it also shows that he was a diligent and hard worker as well.
Yes, totally. Can you imagine? Yeah. So
I'm going to skip a topic and actually do a follow-up with this because this fits in perfectly with what we're talking about. The percentage of Americans who believe in God, that has fallen.
Yes.
It is on its way down.
Yep.
And let's talk a little bit about that. And then let's also go into the people who believe in the institutions that God has set up.
Yeah. The percentage of Americans, and I was doing a little research, but the majority of Americans still think that God exists. All right, and when you talk to people, you wonder, so many question. Are they truly saved? That's what I always ask myself. I kind of, I beat around the bush when I talk to people, but I'm straight up pretty much because they understand. But how many are in His Word? How many look to the events we're seeing and put it in, put them in a biblical worldview. But according to a shocking new survey, but not to me, I mean, that Gallup just released, the percentage of Americans that believe in God has plunged to the lowest level that they've ever recorded. So overall, the percentage of Americans that believe in God has fallen 16 points since 2001, and the church attendance is down. We know that. But as for marriage, this is kind of tripping me out. As for marriage, about 2 out of every 3 young adults in the U.S. believe that marriage is an outdated tradition. So that was crazy to me. And more women thought that than men. So, and I shared my LGBTQ stats about Brown University, how 40%, last week, identified with LGBTQ. I have 2 more that, let me see. Here's a couple more. 29% of Yale students identify as LGBTQ, so almost 30, and 21% of Harvard students. So, but I'm not surprised. That's what Jesus said would come. So, I'm not surprised. I'm just keeping track of this stuff and just keeping tabs on things and just waiting for the Lord to come back.
As many people have said, when people give up faith in God, it's not like there's a space in everyone's heart for God.
Yeah.
So they're putting something else there. Yeah. And I think I heard it on Prager. He said, if you lose faith in God, you don't not believe, you believe in anything.
Yeah.
And you can see that because look at all the isms that have now taken God's place. You have LGBT rights has taken God's place. That is tolerant, that is kind, that is to what's be celebrated rather than faith. You have environmentalism that has taken God's place, and the love of the earth, the love of the goddess that created Gaia has replaced God. You have materialism that has replaced God, where you love the things of this world, fame, fortune, the internet, just lifestyle. And then beyond that, there's so many other isms, whether it be left-right paradigm, whether it be worship of sports. There's so many things that are being replaced with belief of God. It's not like they stopped believing God. They just made other things God.
That's it.
Now let's talk about a very, very depressing issue. The British local council member that called pride a sin. Let's talk about what happened to him.
So what's funny is that once again, I'm not focusing. I'm focusing on this isolated incident because it's our future. It's coming. This is a persecution. So last week I did the Pakistani guy and just kind of there's thousands and thousands and thousands of him,
Yes.
But this this guy kind of tripped out. But a local council member in Britain, he calls pride. So this is the levels, right? So before you couldn't talk about, now you can't even talk about pride. Before you couldn't talk about LGBTQ, now you can't even talk about pride. But a local council member in Britain he's taken legal action after being suspended by the Conservative Party. It's a conservative over a social media post declaring that pride is not a virtue but a sin. The guy's name is King Lawal, and he's been a council member for about 2 years. He was suspended from the Conservative Party, which is crazy, and canceled by 6 other organizations. I mean, he volunteered at schools and everybody canceled him. But his tweet that he shared on Pride Month, he called on those who have pride to repent of their sin and to turn to Jesus Christ. The post included an image citing Isaiah 3:9, stating, "Whatever God calls sin is nothing to be proud of." And the tweet said, "When did pride become a thing to celebrate? Because of pride, Satan fell as an archangel. Pride is not a virtue, but a sin. Those who have pride should repent of their sins and turn to Jesus. He can save you." That's all he said. But in addition to a suspension, Lowell has also been warned of a possible police investigation. But this is what Jesus said, man. This is what he said. And then Lowell mentioned Romans 3:23 in his defense. He goes, "There's no distinction, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God." So a couple other things he said. Lowell also said the blunt emails and cancellations I received were shocking and hurtful. He was surprised. There was no respect, no conversation, and no reasonableness. But he also said, "How I have been treated is really troubling for a democratic society. It must ring alarm bells and should concern everybody who cares about Christian freedoms and free speech, as this can now happen to anyone that is not in support of this extreme LGBTQ movement." And I'm sorry to say, but the LGBTQ army is going to become larger and larger, and persecution, it's just going to come, we need the body of Christ to stand firm and trust that God's plan is perfect. So, we just we look forward to Jesus' rule and reign. That's what I look forward to.
Well, praise God for this guy, because he esteemed Christ more than his well-being, because to go against pride, like you're going against the idol. That is the nouveau fashion of movements to be in. If you have a pride flag, it's basically like a ticket to do anything you want, because you have a right opinion. Yes, it's
bizarro. It's bizarre. It's crazy because it's one level up from him. You attack not attack, but you say something that, God said this, God said that, whatever. And, quote Romans 1, right? Remember people going to prison for one. This is like you're just calling out pride. And it went one level up, So, you're calling straight out the lesbians and gay, guys. You're calling them out with Romans 1, but this was just talking about pride, and pride in general, and people think it's virtuous now,
Yeah. I used to have, on a very personal note, my high school in Texas, their whole thing was pride, and I had a problem with that back in the 90s.
Yeah.
I was like,
really?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Our next topic affects everyone, whether they like it or not. The possible strikes by UPS workers.
Yes. And
Amazon better take notice.
Yes, but before summer is done, it's the contract deadline is July 31st, so it's right around the corner. But the talks between the union of 340,000 delivery drivers are breaking down, and it would impact the delivery of parcels 25 to 30% of the packages shipped in the U.S. And I don't know if you remember I talked about you at the pre, and you didn't remember, about 25 years ago, the 15-day walkout, and there was only 185,000 UPS workers. It was big, but I remember my buddy worked for UPS. And since then, UPS has become an even bigger part of the U.S. economy. Real quick, in 2022, 24.3 million packages a day, totaling 6.2 billion packages by the end of the year. That was just 2022. That's 1/4 of all the U.S. parcel volume. So, and UPS said they're temporarily beginning to, training non-union employees, just like they did before. But I don't know if they can to step in should there be a strike. But that's a lot, man. That's a lot. So, Jonathan Gold, who's the president of supply chain, he says you'll see a supply chain disruption, just like we witnessed during the pandemic. So, and you got your next day, 2-day deliveries. Yeah, they'll be all affected. Crazy.
So stock up now.
Stock up now, yeah. Well, by the 31st, yeah. That's what's today? Today is the 22nd.
22nd.
Wow.
You got about a week to get those Amazon Prime things.
Go to Costco and stock up.
Not everything is bad news. There is some good news out there. All I can say is Viva Italia.
Yes.
We have our next story, which is the Miss Italia beauty pageant. And I just have to stop and go,
yay. A win for Italy. Yay.
Yes, win for Italy.
Yeah. So this, I'm going to see if I can pronounce her name, but it's Pastoral Miraglani. So she came out, well, Miss Italy bans transgender contestants. You must be a woman from birth. And she said, we will not jump on the glittery bandwagon of trans activism. So, and she's a Miss Italy official, but she said also lately beauty contests have been trying to make the news by also using strategies that I think are a bit absurd. So the Miss Italy pageant banning transgender contestant arrives just weeks after the transgender, do you remember the Miss Netherlands, right?
Yes.
Just crowned, yeah.
Mr. Netherlands.
And if you're not aware of that, it was basically a 22-year-old biological male who defeated 9 biological females to win Miss Netherlands. So, he will represent Netherlands in the Miss Universe competition in El Salvador this year. But Miss Universe changed its rules back in 2012, believe it or not, letting transgender contestants compete. I didn't know it went back that far. But there's a one who won, I forget, in 2018. He didn't get or she, whatever. He didn't get as much coverage because it wasn't as much of a thing in 2018. But in October, I told you this, and you knew this already, I think. In 2022, a transgender billionaire purchased the Miss Universe, Miss USA, and Miss Teen USA. So,
but there is no connection, absolutely, between a man winning
zero
Miss Netherlands and the owner of the pageant being transgender.
Yeah.
No, there's no connection.
No
Zero.
connection. Yeah. Oh, but yeah. Italy.
Yes. Again, yay Italy. Viva Italy. Yeah.
Viva Italy. Viva. That's awesome.
All right. Our last story to close out today is tuberculosis.
Yeah.
Has come back. From extinction.
It may come back really strong. So I don't know about this, but I'm just keeping an eye on all these little diseases that are popping up here and there. Michael Yon's keeping an eye on it. I kind of keep an eye on his Twitter. Follow Michael Yon, YON, his Twitter, if you want to keep up on this stuff. But illegal immigrant kids with tuberculosis infections were released into 44 different states. So I don't know what to say about that. The government is releasing thousands of illegal immigrant children with latent tuberculosis into American communities, but nearly 2,500 children with latent infections were released into 44 states, according to the court-ordered report on how the Health and Human Services Department is treating the children. So this is a report. So this is not just hearsay. The government says it can treat the children. It can't treat the children because they are in custody for too short a period of time, and the treatment requires 3 to 9 months. But tuberculosis isn't the only disease that's being monitored. The government had to create protocols to handle other diseases as well. So it's just we see this in the end. We see this in the last days. The with famine comes with the triple. Yeah. So pestilence, famine, and the triple Lindy. Yeah. So.
That's the consequences of spending $111 billion in Ukraine rather than $5 billion to secure the border.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, 200 billion we're up to now, I think.
No.
I had to change it. I had 150, then I had 100, I had 114, or 115, then I had 150, and then I changed it to 200 because I heard that number the other day, and I'm like, holy smokes. So.
Well, then Google's not giving me the right numbers, which means who knows how much it is now.
Yeah, that was by Douglas McGregor. He said that. So, yeah,
I believe crazy. Douglas McGregor.
I do too. I do too. So,
well, Ken, that will conclude our broadcast for this evening. Close us out, Ken.
So, have faith, folks. Christ is coming. Jesus is coming back, and he's coming back soon. Be faithful, read his word, pray, gather in his name, and just look up, for his redemption draws near, man. I wake up every morning and I look forward to every day. I do. But I look at the news and it kind of gets me down every once in a while, but I look forward because I know that Jesus is coming soon. And that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to look at this stuff and relate it to Christ coming back soon. As it gets more and more psycho, he comes, it's faster and closer to his return. So that's where I'm at.
Amen, Ken. And, just to follow up with what you said is perfect. For the unbeliever who has no hope, looking at all this, when they see this, they literally go into depression. Mm-hmm. But we as Christians and believers have a joy knowing that all of this points to Christ coming back. And we have to hold on to that, and we have to share that joy so that others can see it, so that they desire it and they're jealous for it. So we thank you for watching Ken's Corner. Till next time, God bless.